The story begins with John Cian, a player, in the face of divine power. God warns him that time is running out and begins to explain about the Temple of the 10,000 Demons. The great demon led a demonic army, and he built a rare gold temple, removed when drilling the mountains of hell. Originally, the temple was at the top of a tower, but after the Third Divine Demoniac War, the demonic forces were expelled from the top of the tower and the destroyed demons. He who seemed to be a refuge of peace was invaded by unknown enemies, beings with such great powers that they could move to constellations, and annihilated them all around. The tower became a true player's cemetery. John Cian, still incredulous with the fall of the Temple of the 10,000 Demons, now has the chance to reverse everything, as it seeks the Momono Vault. He believes that when he finds him, he may return in time. He then enters the temple. When opening large golden doors, it is received by a huge golden energy. The system informs that he is the first human to weigh in that place, reaching a historical achievement by entering the kingdom of the gods. John Cian, impressed with vision, feels something is wrong and soon realizes that it was detected. Then it activates his skill of the journey, one after the hero's jump, which will help you continue your exploration. Without her, he would never have come there. The skill guides him on a way, but he comes across a dead end. However, pull a chandelier reveals a secret passage. With the help of the chandelier, John Cian illuminates the dark way until it finds large golden doors. He recognizes that place as the destination he sought and reflects on the treatment he received in the past when he was rejected and devalued by other players. Until you receive the golden key. Remembering this moment, it finally activates the key, accessing the castle safe, the Greed of Greed. Inside it finds a huge treasure, a cursed sword, a manual of martial techniques, a magical book of the 8th circle, and even a dragon heart. But he has no time to waste. Enemies are approaching. Using his guide ability, John Cian begins to look for the architect, which you really want, the Metling of Kronos, which has the power to reverse time. Upon finding the hourglass, he realizes that when using it, only the user can come back in time. Plan is to return to before the demonic divine war, climb the tower and prevent intruders, preventing the apocalypse and saving the tower. When the hourglass is activated, time begins to reverse, and the system warns that, because for the first time inside the tower is being changed. John Cian is only 10 minutes before all the sand of the hourglass falls. At this time an invasive creature appears, and John, desperate, take divine weapons found in the safe. He uses Zeus's thunder, electrocuting the enemy, but the creature retaliates with a violent attack. John Cian then finds a new weapon. The Sword of Destruction, like her, can resist until creatures try to devour it, diverting from the attacks and hitting the creature's main body until they leave it on fire. The creature, which before it seemed like a monstrous entity, reveals itself as a boar. John Cian, in a bush of despair, finds a last weapon, the Radiant Spear, the gun of the Goddess of Light, capable of drilling anything. He throws the spear with precision, piercing the boar and causing a large explosion in the safe. The system warns that he was the first player to defeat an intruder, a historic feat. The hourglass's sand finally runs out, and the Kamona safe begins to collapse while everything around it collapses. The system informs that John Cian is now the new owner of the Kaora's safe. He acquired the power of Gluttony, for the mouth of the Gluttony was destroyed. But still, the future of the game seems uncertain and full of challenges. Suddenly, he realizes that he is being transported to another moment and place. But something strange happens. All his skills and the experience he has accumulated until that moment begin to disappear. He returns in time to start, when the tutorial began, and finds himself again in a forest illuminated by daylight, along with several other players who, like him, do not know how they ended up there. The system then receives them and announces the beginning of the tutorial, leaving them all shocked and confused. John, in turn, realizes that he has really returned to the past and notes that people are as disoriented as before. At that moment, a man approaches and grabs John's arm, asking what he did to end there. John recognizes him, remembering that this man had died in the tutorial, with his neck torn away. Despite the situation, Dom tries to calm him, but the man gets agitated, questioning whether all this was a prank or a kidnapping. John knows that, no matter how much he spoke, no one would listen to him at that moment. Everything would only be clear when the waves started to attack. The system announces that Chapter 1 of the tutorial is about adaptation, and that time until the first monster wave would be 4 minutes and 20-1. Everyone is confused, asking, which means this wave of monsters? John, looking at his status, realizes that his attributes are quite high and that, in addition, he still has unique skills such as Valtority of Glass Graced and Valtority. John asks if these powers are a reflection of what he acquired when he returned in time. With that in mind, it decides to test your new skills. John summons a small chest and opens the safe from greed. Finds a series of powerful items: Hava breathing from the fire dragon, Omener, Thor smoke, heavenly demon Martial Sea Sparts. With these items and their newly added authority, John feels that he has the strength necessary to fight. The system then warns that the first wave of monsters is beginning. A fierce lob pack approaches, making players panic. Many start to run, certain that they would die there. However, John takes a step ahead, and says that if they don't want to die, will need to fight. Some question their sanity, asking how they could fight without weapons, but one person, Kong Han Shu, believes John has one. John then reveals his strategy: he will face all monsters alone, while others focus on defending himself. Kong, although he existed, accepts the proposal, but is concerned about John's ability to face so many monsters. The wolves alone. At this point, Dom opens the Greed of Greed again and uses the martial parts of the 10 paths. With this ability, he gives a very powerful kick on a wolf, throwing away, with more accurate blows. Don destroys several logos, impressing everyone around him. Kong watches, marveling at John's fight technique, which, although not as strong as it seemed, he was defeating the monsters with a completely different style than his. Meanwhile, the other players start to gather and defeat the remaining wolves, now confident that they can handle with the creatures too. However, John is exhausted. He feels that his body can no longer stand the intense pace of combat. At this point, an inexplicable pressure arises on. The system informs that the Crow Constellation is observing. John wonders if the Crow, the original owner of the Vault of Dance, realized that he used his powers without permission. He fears that this may mean his punishment. However, to your surprise, the Crow does not react angrily. Instead, he smiles at John, leaving intrigued. John, suspicious, begins to wonder if the Crow knew all the time that was happening, and if somehow he had given permission to use power. Feeling a slight sense of relief, Dom decides to use a little more of his authority. Now with the devotion of the Gluttony system reports that he needs a target to use this ability. John Cian looked to the ground and found all wolves had been defeated. Intrigued by the power that will just awaken, he decided to test his ability to authorize the Gluttony. With an accurate gesture, he applied power over a wolf's corpse. In a surprising moment, several voracious mouths emerged from his hand, as if they were small, wild and hungry creatures who began to devour every part of the animal, reducing it to the bones. The system announced that by absorbing the nutrients of that body, Dom had acquired a brown wolf, increasing its strength at 1 point and its agility in 2. The player could barely believe. Simply by consuming a corpse, its attributes had been improved. If he could use this power without restrictions, he thought, it would soon become formidably powerful. However, a concern arose in his mind. Just as he has the power of greed, using the authority of gluttony would also draw the attention of Constellations. The system reported that the Princess Constellation was distracted, immersed in his meal by a trees. It looked like luck had smiled at him, but John knew he couldn't depend only on her. After all, Beelzebub, a demon god of tremendous power, was also present. Meanwhile, the system displayed a curious scene. Beelzebub opened his huge mouth, as if he wanted to make a message, but instead stuck even more meat inside John, with a mixture of caution and humor. He wondered if the dreaded demon god would not really be interested in devouring him. If that were the case, he thought, the better he would be comfortable, for the more Beelzebub feed it, the easier it would be to convince him to be satisfied. Decided to take the opportunity, Dom again used his authority of gluttony, this time devouring all the bodies he found along the way. After absorbing several victims, the system announced that Beelzebub celebrated the sudden banquet. Even if the increases of strength and agility had been modest, respectively, John understood that sharing his energy with gluttony yielded smaller gains. Still, this was not a problem because its goal at that moment was not to maximize its status, but to seal a tacit agreement with demonic powers. He joked, asking the gluttony if she would already be pleased, while Beelzebub, with her mouth still full, seemed to answer with an involuntary drool, and that was just the appetizer. Hours passed and around the other players fought with the makeshift resources, logs, branches and a lot of determination. Finally, some managed to defeat the remaining wolves and a cry of victory echoed for Boston. The system announced the conclusion of the first chapter of the tutorial, entitled Adaptation, and all received 50 reward points, while the players commented on the experience. John reflected there were no serious injuries on that timeline, and perhaps the fact that he faced most of the monsters alone had contributed to it. The system then displayed the individual contribution table. John led 220 points, followed by Kong with 80-1, third person with 40. For John, those 220 points were a reason for satisfaction. For the more points, better rewards and greater chances of being chosen by a constellation. His natural goal was to be number 1, but something was restless, and although he had surpassed the first wave safely, he felt the need for a deeper weapon. For your combat style, using weapons that depended exclusively on your current status could be dangerous, since your body was not prepared to hold so much. There was nothing decent for near, and so John decided that he would leave for the forest in search of greater improvements, and some equipment that really compensated his limitations. After all, with their status evolving, it would be possible to unlock even better treasures in the warehouse. When he prepared to follow his way, a female voice called him. A woman approached, wondering where he was going alone. John frowned as he tried to recognize that figure. It was not possible to forget someone so striking. This was your, also known as a Reedism, from her past life, she who had become famous on the tower's upper floors next to Kong Yensu. It was known for his skill and leadership, and the heir impatiently began to brown, asked repeatedly why he insisted on following alone, especially in such a chaotic environment. John, aware that every lost second could be crucial, replied that he would just take a quick look at the area. He argued that standing still, it would find benefits, and soon, with the beginning of the next wave of monsters, everyone would have to reorganize and face the danger again. But you were distressed, replaced that a simple conversation would not change the burning. Surely about the exact moment when the monsters would reappear. It was then that a system window designed before them, announcing that the next wave would arrive in just 3 hours. John relieved by enough time to seek forest improvements, with Quimura returning and paying more attention to system messages, so that she could organize herself. With the others still reluctant, and the heir questioned what exactly he intended to do, and what would be the true purpose of that lonely race. John, without losing time, he replied that it would be much more productive if she used that time to prepare. After all, every moment was precious, and so while the heir was momentarily unanswered, Dom left towards the forest, determined to increase its status, and find the weapon that would compensate for its current limitations. Without giving even space for an answer, she shuts up. Later, in the forest, Dom continues with his hunt. He eliminates a wolf after the other, and when it is finished, he comments to himself that he must have accumulated enough meat to satisfy the gluttony. With a controlled gesture, he calls his small carnivores manifestations of his gluttony to devour the bodies of the slaughtered wolves. However, the system emits an unusual message. It already consumes excessive wolf meat, and therefore, it can no longer absorb the nutrients of this same entity. According to the rules imposed by Beelzebub, the banquet was saturated. John mentally questions. It's tired. It was as expected. It is not enough to repeat the same menu. The variety is essential. With a challenging smile, he goes to the entity, promising that he will soon find something tastier to offer, which makes Beelzebub, his eyes shining, eagerly wait for the next delight. Determined to test the limits of his power, Don decides to perform an experiment. It opens the Greed of Greed and removes the legendary sword of the Drao hold. According to its reasoning, the treasures contained in that safe can only be recovered when infused with power and shape, since, in other words, the essence of the treasure is it loses, leaving only power in a gross state. With this logic, he takes a branch Sintress, and begins to imbue in him the energy of the sword. Almost immediately, he feels a huge wave of power emanating from the branch. But the destination of the object is sealed. The branch does not resist each and incinerates, becoming powder. Gift reflects, concluding that the modest piece of wood did not support the legendary power that had been deposited in it. In the midst of this experience, your martial skills. He imagines that if he had used the dragon breath, a technique capable of making wolves' bodies completely disintegrated, nothing would be left to absorb. It was clear that the authority of greed works exclusively with live or intact corpse. He even wondered if it would be possible to transfer this power to others, but soon found that such an attempt was not possible. Alternative would be useless, then concludes that his only alternative would be to improve his own skills, to the point of manipulating treasures without depending so much. Still in need of a suitable weapon for his combat style, Dom decides to explore the forest that surprisingly is not as dense as he imagined, hoping to find something that would fill this gap. Although he wanted to have his guide ability to make the search easier, he is excited by the possibility of finding the perfect item. Opens the Greed of Greed again, and can extract the muzzle from enro, an object from a low-level monster, with the hyena head, known for its exceptional for being trapped. Thus, by activating the ability granted by the muzzle, Dom begins to sniff the peculiar cartumador, a metallic trail, almost as smell of rust. That confirms your suspicions. In the meantime, the system displays a curious message. Beelzebub, in the midst of his own banquet, begins to cry, or better, murmuring that he is hungry, repeating in your messages an almost childish appeal. John, watching the situation, plays internally that he seems to be dealing with a hungry child. After running for a long time following the trail, he finds himself exhausted, commenting on to himself that the distance was greater than imagining and that, for a brief moment, the smell seemed to have dissipated. But suddenly he detects him again. When you turn around, you face a creature approaching, a gray wolf, visibly different from the others. John deduces that, just as his muzzle had smelled the smell, the wolf himself detected him. He recalls that before his temporal regression, his life was full of distractions, but now he decides to concentrate all his power this time. Without hesitation, the gray wolf invests with a wide-bodied mouth in a fierce attack to reap his life right there. But John, agile and experienced, dodges the goal. He realizes that the animal is not only larger but also extremely fast, attacking with the intention of reaching his throat. If it weren't for its martial arts, it would already be covered by blood itself. In a desperate effort, Dom attempts to identify a breach in the wolf's onslaught, and disfers a powerful kick against his ribs. However, the impact has a minimum effect. The wolf remains standing, while he himself feels his body shake. It is questioned if the failure of the coup is due to their attributes not yet at the ideal level, because although it has reached the animal's belly, it left only a dirty. It concludes that the wolf is, in fact, a formidable opponent, having speed and strength that challenge him every moment. The situation gets worse when, in addition to the gray wolf, other brown wolves begin to surround it. John realizes that there is no escape if it continues. Amid chaos, he finally finds what he sought so much, an object with an unmistakable aroma of rust. When the wolves rush to attack him, he grabs a seemingly rusty sword, but which in his mind still holds a sharp blade. In a decisive movement, Gift imposed the weapon and accurately cut in half the first of the logos. As enemies fall before their blows, Dom is impressed by the persistence of the sword, even discarded by time. It seems to carry an inherent power, an essence of the treasure stored in the troubleshooting. He imagines that if a weapon like that survived so far, there is certainly a story and latent potential waiting to be explored with each cut. He reaffirms his determination to overcome the challenges of the forest, as he ponders the next steps to improve his skills and conquer the treasures he wants so much. John is not intimidated. With the determination of those who have faced many battles, he beheads another new one, convinced that he finally found the weapon he was looking for so much. He knows that from that moment there is no room for appeal. Its goal is to eliminate Alpha before the next wave comes, invoking its authority of greed. He acquires the skill and made the ML family loud. With a firm look, Tom whispers to himself, "From now on, things will be different." But the wolf, taken with fury, does not take a long time to react. In a furious attack, the animal invests against him. Without showing any hesitation, Doom advances and hits his sword right in the wolf's mouth. Taking advantage of the opportunity, he desires a series of accurate cuts throughout the beast's body, strategically retreating as the wolf is wrapped in blood. But still standing and increasingly enraged. Observing the combat, Gift reflects, "This is not your fencing, it is at the same level as the Imperial family." Determined to end the confrontation, he decides that it is time for the final blow. When the wolf tries again to snap him, Dom sticks his sword in the animal's mouth with a quick and decisive movement, tearing a generous blood of his blood. At the end of this clash, the gray wolf falls dead. The system then announces that he defeated the head of the wolf forest, and as a reward, Dom rises, gaining 500 personal merit points, and acquiring the skin of the gray wolf. For John, this victory represents much more than just finding a gun. He understands that his journey aims to accumulate merit, which can be won in many ways, facing monsters in tutorial raids, defeating solitary creatures, or even winning other players. And he knows that, at the end of the tutorial, the number of clashes, including players, will increase considerably. This is the fastest method for merit. Not satisfied, John decides to enjoy his new power. Using his gluttony, he devours the Grey Wolf, absorbing 3 points of strength, 5 of agility and 2 of vitality. While Beelzebul, the dreaded demon god, is pleased with that banquet, John decides to call his items. It imposes the Sword of the Forgotten Hero, a long-class but skilled-class sword, including a poison that slows the hero's recovery, and the Trace, which increases the attack by 10% against monsters. In addition, the skin of the Grey Wolf he acquired grants charisma between allies and imposes fear on enemies, benefiting any leader, not to mention the Blessing of the Wind, which raises its speed to 5%. The system even records that the crow, always attentive, evaluate the sword with a twinge of apprehension, recognizing that it is not that bad. With the time for the next wave marked in 12 minutes, Dom wears the wolf's skin and rushes to return. However, even so, he decides to take advantage of the situation, with an opportunity to observe the reaction of the other players, as he has no intention of dragging someone who complains every second. Upon arriving at the location, the chaos is total. Screams as with while players face a horde of wild boar. On the front line, they highlight their skilled Kongsi, who, even without robust equipment, demonstrate extraordinary potential. In the midst of this riot, one of the players wastes no time in ordering and criticizing his companions, kicking someone and screaming orders, as if running a company. John, hidden among the bushes, just observes. After all, he has seen this type of person in other battlefields. Meanwhile, you fight with all your strength. Exhausted and wounded, she thinks that if it wasn't for a makeshift piece of branch, she would be dead. The boars seem to have no end, and when she notices she is bleeding, the words of a companion echo in his mind, a dark reminder of the dangers surrounding her. When a new boar throws herself toward her, she prepares to defend herself, but suddenly a precise blow cuts the animal in half. Surprise, it is John who performs such a feat. The boar's corpse shatters before his eyes, and John, stepping firmly on the remains, shouts to concentrate and deal first with the situation, while pointing to a new herd of Javali and If. Approaching, aware that he needs even more power to survive, Dom returns to the Safe of Greed and this time, removes 2 tendons from the upper orchi, an item that promises to increase its strength and provide greater resilience to the muscles. Even doubting if your body will endure the transformation, he decides on Iskar. As soon as a boar jumps toward him, John, with sharp reflexes, deviates from the attack, tail to continue his journey towards overcoming jumping agility. He launched himself over the creature, splashing his blade with deadly precision in the back. On the monster, who broke up in an instant, barely had time to breathe when 2 wild boars appeared at his fourth. However, he dropped them as ease as the butter spreads, leaving everyone around Atanicius with such dexterity. John in turn watched closely, impressed with robustness of the opponent's tendons. At that moment a hand landed on his shoulder. As he turned, he came across the Karakinha, who praised him that he said his way of fighting was at a level completely different from those useless on the sidelines, pointing to the group that watched them. But the hero did not let himself be shaken by the compliment. The man revealed to be the CEO of a large corporation, and proposed an undeniable offer. Upon returning to the real world, John would be generously rewarded, and would occupy a prominent position in the company. John, intrigued and at the same time tempted by the proposal, nodded his companion, half in a joke. He said he already knew he would make the right choice. However, with a malicious smile, Dom commented that he was in need of a human Viscudo if, when asked about the meaning of this, he did not hesitate to clear a kick, making it clear that that guy would not have the ability to face the approaching enemies. Meanwhile, a real boar onslaught was forming furiously in his direction. Surprisingly, Dom remained impassive, and an almost irreverent silence took over the group. That's when the system, always vigilant, Ka announced that the constellation of the Crow had been delighted with his performance, even though Bebu showed his irritation for feeling aside. When finally all creatures were devoted, the system proclaimed the end of the second wave. and a wave of celebration spread between survivors. The classification showed Johnson with 80 points, followed by Kong with 180 points, and the third competitor with 100 points. When consuming brown boar, Dom not only increased his strength and vitality, but he also saw his tiny carnivorous allies feed on him, while Beelzebub delighted with tasty meat in a nostalgic thought. Dom decided to reserve a piece to Beelzebub, remembering his past life, when everything he had consumed in the tutorial was unsightly wolf meat. As he cut the boar's meat, the rust in his sword bothered, but he cared little about it. That's when a woman approached and with an air of curiosity, asked if she could help. Owner of a Citadel meet Sidrato's restaurant. She immediately caught the attention of John, who saw her not only a cook, but a potential ally. With a simple "Beauty, can you leave?" he invited her to join the team. In a few moments each member of the group assumed a function. Some ran to collect Len, others began to set up the camp, although the question of how to light the fire still worries some. Without wasting time, Dom opened the Greed of Greed and withdrew Shock's ember with the Spirit of Fire, firmly stating that he could control the flames. After the fire comes to life, everyone gathered to hunt the boar and feed. While Beelzebub didn't take his eyes off the banquet, Dom remembered it was time to satisfy his own hunger. Soon Sice approached, offering a bottle of water to John. Noticing the sword in her hands, she asked if he had found her in the forest. With a nod he confirmed, explaining that luck had been his ally that day. But in a silent thought, Dom noticed a twinge of envy in his eyes. That he recalled from his past life, that she had been an excellent sword practitioner, and that, with the makeshift weapon who carried at that moment, her true power was repressed, drawing her attention to the system screen. Dom showed that she had 100 points and explained that, with this amount she could buy a sword. Just click on the points to open the online store. If surprised by the resemblance to a game, commented on the situation, and John recalled that he had already mentioned. To survive in that environment, mastering the system was essential, so she made the purchase, and in a magical moment, the sword materialized before her, which made her genuinely impressed. Curious, he wondered how he had discovered such functionality, and he just smiled, attributing his ability to the quick adaptation to the new world. Although she thought she also adapted easily, she realized that she will not be able to accompany him at that level. Not so, John Cian joked, to what he, smiling, asked how she knew her name. If Shy confessed to being just starting to use the system, and after a brief laugh of John, she thanked for the help, expressing her desire to work beside her from there. As a dawn, the system announced that only 1 hour was left for the next wave, and the group found themselves asking what to do while waiting, showing leadership. If he began to organize his companions, distributing tasks, some were in charge of collecting stones to throw, while others gathered grinds to improvise weapons. John reflected that, compared to his past life, everything had changed. Perhaps the presence of strong leadership diminished panic, allowing each one to focus on their role. He himself took the opportunity to focus on his secret strategy, opening the Greed treasure safe again. Dom removed a tomb that contained a secret training method with a circle of blue mana, the basic element so that the wizards could conjure their spells. Although the blue bro was regarded as less efficient, he knew there were numerous methods of improvement. The first step was to establish a solid foundation using the blue tower method, which consisted of building firm pillars on a robust base, gradually advancing for more sophisticated techniques. However, he also needed to improve his energy center, for even if this method allowed the acquisition of mana for magical training, the effective use of martial arts also depended on the refinement of this inner energy. With that in mind, Dom closed his eyes and focused on silence. He controlled his breath, and meditated on all accumulated knowledge over the years. He felt his energy go through his lungs, and with extreme caution, began to extract the force that was contained within him. Slowly, he allowed that energy to integrate into his being, merging with his body and consolidating himself in his heart. It was then that the system proclaimed the first mana circle had been successfully created. This new circle not only expanded its level of power, but it also increased the speed and effectiveness of the spells it could use. In recognition of the extraordinary achievement, Dom received a reward of 1,000 points, while the system continued to announce new possibilities. Then, under the glow of the stars, the constellation of the Three Sisters stared, open gauche, the unfolding of events, while the constellation of the Heavenly Mother displayed a look of admiration. John, in turn, realized that numerous deities linked to magic were showing interest in him, but for his, he already had the firm presence of Papaya and Drunk beside him. Even though they were not divine apostles, those two undoubtedly surpassed most heavenly entities. Not all, however, were satisfied with increasing number of guests. Beelzebub demonstrated his displeasure, and Crow, removing something from his treasure, frowned before taking a drastic attitude. Suddenly the connection with the smaller rank constellations, John clearly reflected that, for a deity to interfere with the system, it took a gigantic effort. After all, blocking communication from other entities was no simple task. Relieved with the disappearance of unwanted visitors, Beelzebub commented, almost in a tone of outburst, that he felt more relaxed. Lots of interference. While Crow kept his eyes fixed in John, in an enigmatic silence with a finally silent atmosphere, Dom decided to resume his training. Although the Blue Tower method is low efficiency, it did not cease to significantly strengthen its mana circle. It was then that a voice took him out of his concentration. Someone called him, clearly bothered, wondering if he would be sleeping. Only 12 minutes left for the next wave. As he opened his eyes, John came across a Noarenho who, with some unbelief, said he thought he was already dead for so long of immobility. The young man, who presented himself as Park Dong-pil, he tried to soften the moment, saying that they both shared the same situation, and implying that John seemed not to have close friends. But for John, that was not the first time he had heard over the pair tricks. Unpleasant memories of the past, where the boy, before the regression, fell food from older people, came to light, even though he was pushed into the forest during a recognition, which somehow revealed his guide ability to him. John could not forget the betrayal of the young man. After a brief dialogue, John firmly put his hand on Park's shoulder and proposed that he took the role of bait in the next invested. Shortly thereafter, the third wave. It began. The group, armed with makeshift instruments, was preparing to face creatures that, at that time, remembered crazy monkeys and wielding weapons. SI, always attentive, ordered everyone to prepare and follow the plan to avoid injuries, but the amount of enemies seemed unmeasured, and the formation of the group was beginning to crumble. As the tension increased, Dom forced the reluctant Park to fulfill its part. Trembling with fear, the boy wondered if it was really right. Complaining about your own slowness. Without hesitation, John kicked, falling on his stomach, a movement that inevitably attracted the attention of blood-hungry creatures. As he rose, Park was surrounded by enemies anxious to attack him and in despair began to run, begging for help. "Come here," shouted John, and Park, with no alternative, answered the call. Accurately, Dom ordered quickly, able to dodge while with surprising ability, he opened the greed of greed, and removed a fireball, held with the firmness of those who imposed a baseball ball, who threw in the Park direction for a tryst. The young man saw his life pass before his eyes and narrowly managed to dodge the coup. Astonished, he exclaimed, "What that is magic, is insanity." The group, amazed, he wondered if they would also be able to such a feat, as if they were living the pages of a manga. John, however, considered that his continuous intervention could prevent the others gain the necessary experience, as well as the points that could be obtained after combat. He then decided to concentrate his fury against the monstrous monkeys, devouring them with agility that only strengthened him. In the midst of the battle, Bebu commented, in an almost gourmet appreciation, that the well-passed meat was delicious. At this moment, Park, taken by a feeling of loyalty and repentance, knelt and swore to serve John with his life, offering himself to what it was necessary. John, smiling with the newly discovered loyalty, advised the young man to feed well, which, after all, in the next wave, he would have to run again. Meanwhile, other wild boars emerged in the forest, creating a new challenge. But it was John King, with mastery, stings him, showing impressive power in reaching level 3, an unusual facet. Because usually this progression only occurred after the 5th wave. Perhaps that sudden increase in experience was the result of the authority emanating. And at the end of the battle, the system announced that the 3rd wave was over, granting each of the participants in 50 points. Thus, under the starry cloak and with the deities watching from afar, Dom followed his journey, each challenge shaping to face the next clashes in this world where magic, courage and fate were surprisingly. John watches the system screen and realizes with some satisfaction that the classification has changed. Now he occupies the 2nd position, while Kong retreated to third place. He barely had time to absorb his news when a huge boar approaches. Pumpendo the silence with its threatening presence. With a challenging smile, Dom exclaims, "Ah, you finally arrived," heading to the dreaded chafon of the Hill of the Boar, the animal that dug the land of the region without hesitation. It opens the Greed of Greed, and invokes the Vapa Vapa skill, a magic forged in the mysterious colorless tower, capable of maximizing the wire of any weapon. With the conviction of an experienced warrior, announces that it will soon end the challenge. When the boar invests his attack, Dom moves with impressive speed, cutting the beast in half as if she said a piece of butter. The victory is complete. He wins 500 points of personal merit and guarantees precious prey of the giant. While requiring your prize, Dom reflects that, unlike the legendary wolf cover, the item obtained from the boar is just raw material for the creation of new artifacts. It cannot be used without first being processed. Decided, I keep the material carefully, but your attention is suddenly attracted. For an intense glow by his side, Hallie rests on the Forgotten Hero's tool. Intrigued, he wonders if this would not be what Javali wanted him to unearth, especially because there was an apparent connection with the legendary sword of the Forgotten Hero, promising to fastest this mystery. From the mystery later, Dom leaves back to the camp. Arriving at the base, it finds everything surprisingly organized, with team members helping the injured and reinforcing the defenses. Impressed with the structure, he supports a trunk that serves as a makeshift table, both the sword of the Forgotten Hero and the Nuliat tool. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Dom removes from the Greed of Greed the introduction to the Forge of the Black Rock, an ancestral technique of the tribe of the dwarfs of Roshanadra. With preparations ready for the next wave of challenges, he decides to improve his gun and start. Then the process of sharpening the sword over a polishing stone. While John is dedicated to this meticulous work, an elder approaches, admired with the young man's dexterity. Few blacksmiths can sharpen a sword manually like this. Not even I, comment old, showing respect for the boy's ability. Curious, Dom asks if he works with iron, and the elder confirms that he dedicates his life to the art of metallurgy. Inquisitive, the master in question about the origin of the sword, and John, with a discreet smile, attributes his luck to chance. Accepting the challenge, the old man offers to continue the work, taking the rusty weapon, and starting a polished with mastery. Although rusty, the sword has an exceptional balance and few damage, observes the elder, while both accompany a restoration process. After a few minutes of intense work, the sword shines intensely, as if it had reborn. The elder comments that it had not been dedicated to something with such affinity for a long time, and installs. Dom realizes that the weapon has become, by its classification evolved from D to D+, now imbued with the master stock, which increases the sharpening to 20%. In addition to a trace of the hero, that gives 15% of additional damage against monsters. Satisfied, John declares that the sword is impeccable. The old blacksmith, impressed with the result, assaults that despite his simple appearance, the weapon demonstrates a rare delicacy. In a gesture of gratitude and camaraderie, Tom offers the wild island of the wolf's skin, form of recognition for the aid provided. Suddenly the system interrupts John's thoughts with an unusual alert. The constellation of the Golden Crown Soldier showed interest for the player Goshen Cell. Astonished, John recalls that this soldier is one of the 70-2 demonic lords subordinate to the 7 capital sins, specifically Beres, the 20th 8th lord. Although some see him only as a war fanatic, thirsty for carnage, Beres is actually an alchemist capable of turning almost any metal into gold, and her mastery with iron rivalry with that of Hephaesto, even if its focus is pure destruction. John assumes that Beres's interest decreases over the blacksmith's elder. Meanwhile, Chunky discreetly followed the events. Asks surprised the message displayed on the screen, explaining with patience. Dom clarifies that it is a constellation or divine beings that inhabit a Tukal. The group of a confusing tower asks you because a god would be interested in him, as John has so much knowledge about these entities. With an enigmatic smile, Dom reveals that he also has a constellation attentive to his footsteps, and advises, do not worry. No constellation can hurt you directly. Receiving your attention can actually be quite advantageous. He remembers, example, as it was awarded the power of fire thanks to this heavenly blessing. Trying for the possibility of evolving, Sean admits that forging weapons is much more practical than facing armed monsters with only one piece of branch. Tomo Salam. Then an alliance with a firm handshake, and John thinks it was lucky to find such a competent ally to take care of the field equipment. While the system reports that exactly 3 hours and 20 minutes to the next wave, Dom wastes no time to seek further improvement. He activates the skill of the three talents, a method that aligns the origins of heaven, earth and man to observe the mysteries of the cosmos. With your mana circle solidly formed in the heart, the next step is to open your energy center, which should manifest itself in your abdomen autonomously. Concentrating all your energy, Dom finally reaches the necessary inner balance, and the system confirms with satisfaction the success of the procedure. Exhausted but invigorated, he receives 1,000 points as a reward. Think about this new achievement. Shortly thereafter, as the camp prepares for the next challenge, Sean approaches the blade he had requested. Surprised by the speed of work, Dom praises the achievement of the young man, who explains to have sought a refinement agent, and surprisingly, it turned the skin of the new gray into an imposing cover, and converting the wild boar in a goodwill. Sean proudly asks if the result pleases, and John enthusiastically confirms that he was delighted with the quality of them. In his heart, Dom recognizes the impressive talent of Shondo, who was able to forge a high-level weapon without conventional tools. Fact that certainly caught the attention of Bare Eyes. Carefully, Sean keeps his creation in a makeshift leather, made with the surplus leather, and thanks the blacksmith for the aid. John always practical. It suggests that the young man dedicates himself to taking care of the field equipment, thus avoiding in direct combat, a contribution that will benefit everyone. The climate was tense because everyone knew that the next wave would still be worse. As time was running out, the group was preparing hard, led by Koa, who kept confidence even in the midst of fear. Koa noticed that many had relaxed, even from after John's warning that the challenge would be too big. In an instant, a tall crash broke the environment. Kong, hitting the floor and crying out. By silence, he aroused everyone's attention. Distracted, the group turned to the sound. Ikkyu approached to thank Kong for the initiative. But man only waited and turned, demonstrating his own restlessness. Without delay, the fourth wave broke out. A lobby arcade appeared on the horizon, and the group's first impression was that it would be an easy fight. After all, they had faced wolves before. But this time the opponents were gray wolves, with dimensions that bent those of the usual enemies. Park, with fear, asked John if that was really possible, and the warrior confirmed. Of these wolves were giants, it was not simple sheep. With a sarcastic tone, Dom mocked, implying that Park was waiting for smaller enemies and remembered everyone. Which, despite having already faced giant creatures, Kong and Park were of distinct temperament. For him, the tip was simple: scales less and run more. Startled, Park threw herself to the escape, becoming bait for the fast wolves who set out toward him as he moaned and asked for help. It was not shaken. Criticizing the young man's exaggeration, he summoned his well-known fireball, which flew, annihilating most creatures in a single blow. Bobu, in a relaxed tone, joked that he had already separated the cutlery to the barbecue. Even so, some wolves managed to escape the initial attack, determined not to leave any survivor. Dom declared, an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, and opened the greed of greed to extract the feared Fiskerman skill. With his eyes shining with fury, he set off for the fight, using the bloody wolf to decimate the enemies. Now, with the center of its energy fully open, their martial techniques have become even more lethal. In the midst of the carnage, the system notified that the first form of the bloody wolf Dishans had been improved with the power of its internal energy, causing multiple red rays to explode from the blade, re-agreeing every approaching wolf. While the blood still dripped through the battlefield, Park, between sobs, asked, "You are still there at the same time?" The young man began to face the gray wolves with a growing determination, improving their strength and agility with each blow, which did not go unnoticed by BS, which also delighted with a violent show. Amid chaos, Park complained, asking if he could not help because the group seemed to be on the edge of the collapse, especially if and Kong, who fought to maintain the pace. Kong, despite his strength, had difficulty accompanying the agile movements of enemies. But then something unusual caught the eye for itself. Wielding his sword with mastery, he faced the wolves so skillfully that the constellation of the crowned spider stopped to observe each movement. John, noticing the divine interest, reflected that that look belonged to Baal, one of the most formidable of the 70-2 demonic hordes, master of fencing and commander of 60-6 legions. It was not surprising that such a powerful being wanted to evaluate the potential of herself. After all, in the past life, his speed with the sword was legendary, as if several blades danced at the same time. At this moment she showed her dexterity, eliminating wolves easily. John understood that Baal was testing herself to know if she deserved her power. seeing her knock down another wolf, and disperse a group that clustered around him. The warrior felt that the test had been overcome. When the wave finally dissipated, the classification was revealed to R. John Firstwith.